Not loudly, not with anger, just with the quiet certainty people often carry when they believe they already understand the ending of someone else's story. He would fail. The words floated through the air almost casually, as if they were stating something simple, something obvious. A small judgment, spoken in passing. A prediction, offered with calm confidence. And strangely, no one questioned it. The room moved on. Conversations continued. Soft laughter appeared here and there. Life seemed to continue without noticing that a quiet line had just been drawn across someone's future. He heard it. Of course he heard it. How could he not? Words like that have a way of finding the heart, even when they are not meant for it. They move softly through the air and settle somewhere deep inside, where silence lives. For a moment, nothing changed. He did not respond. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He simply stood there, carrying the sound of those words in the quiet place within him. Sometimes people imagine that strength is loud, that it shows itself in quick replies or sharp defenses. But in that moment, there was no noise inside him, only stillness. And perhaps a question. Was it true? It is a strange thing how easily doubt can enter the mind when others speak with certainty. Even when the heart knows something deeper, those small voices can linger. They said he would fail. Such a simple sentence. Yet it carried a weight that could easily bend a person who was not careful. He felt it for a moment, that quiet pressure that comes when the world seems to expect your fall. When people look at you and already imagine the moment you will stumble. Have you ever felt that? That quiet moment when someone has already decided what you will become. Sometimes the mind wants to react quickly, to explain, to correct a story before it grows, but he did not move. He allowed the words to exist without chasing them away. They continued speaking, of course. Their voices were calm, almost thoughtful, as if they were studying a simple truth about the world. Some people watch others the way they watch clouds in the sky, predicting where they will drift, how they will fade, when they will disappear. And sometimes they believe those predictions completely. But something quiet was happening inside him. Not anger, not humiliation, just awareness. He began to notice the strange nature of their certainty. How easily people speak about futures they cannot see. How comfortable they become when they place limits on someone else's path. They did not hate him. That was not the feeling in their voices. If anything, there was something even more ordinary than hatred, assumption. They believed they understood him. They believed they knew the distance he could travel, the weight he could carry, the patience he possessed. And perhaps they believed that silence meant weakness. So they continued. Their quiet predictions settled into the air like dust that no one thought to wipe away. But something else settled too, a deeper silence inside him. Not the silence of defeat. No, the silence of watching. The silence of someone who understands that words, once spoken, often reveal more about the speaker than about the one being judged. He did not argue with them. He did not offer proof. He did not rush to correct the story they had already written for him. Instead, he simply carried their words with him, quietly. Sometimes the most important moments in a life do not begin with victory. They begin with a sentence spoken by someone else. A sentence meant to close a door. They said he would fail. And in the quiet space that followed those words, something inside him slowly awakened. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a quiet awareness that some stories are not meant to be argued with. They are meant to be lived. Even after the voices faded and the moment passed, their meaning remained somewhere within him, like a quiet echo in an empty room. They said he would fail. It is strange how a single sentence can follow a person long after it is spoken. Not because the words themselves are powerful, but because the mind keeps returning to them, turning them slowly, asking questions that may never be answered. At first, he tried not to think about it. He walked forward, step by step, as anyone would. The world around him remained calm, unchanged. The sky still opened above him in the same quiet way. The wind still moved through the trees. Nothing in the world seemed concerned about the prediction that had been made. And yet, inside him, something had shifted. Not in a loud way. More like a stone dropped gently into water, sending small ripples across the surface. Their voices returned sometimes when the day grew quiet. Not clearly, not loudly, just enough to remind him of what had been said. They believed he would fail. There were moments when the mind whispered back to those words. Why did they think so? Had they seen something in him that he had not noticed? Was there a weakness hidden somewhere within him that others could see more clearly? Doubt has a soft voice. It does not shout or demand attention. It simply waits for silence and then begins to speak in gentle questions. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps the path ahead was heavier than he imagined. Perhaps the quiet confidence inside him was only a fragile thing, easily broken by the weight of time. For a moment, these thoughts lingered. Anyone who says they never feel such moments is simply telling a story about themselves. The human heart is not made of stone. It listens. It wonders. And yet something else lived inside him as well. A stillness. Not pride. Not stubbornness. Just a quiet space where his thoughts could settle without rushing. He began to observe the feeling instead of fighting it. The discomfort. The urge to answer them. Because there were moments when the desire to speak rose quickly within him. To explain who he truly was. To show them they had misunderstood something important. It would have been easy. A few words. A calm defense. A small effort to correct the picture they had painted of him. Many people choose that path. And sometimes it feels necessary. But each time the urge appeared, he paused. He noticed something curious. The more he imagined defending himself, the more restless he became. His thoughts moved faster. His breathing grew tighter, and the quiet place inside him began to shrink. Was it really necessary to respond? Did every judgment require an answer? He watched the question carefully. The world is full of voices, some kind, some careless, some certain about things they cannot possibly know. If a person tried to answer every one of those voices, would there ever be peace? He realized something slowly. Their prediction had power only if he carried it with anger, only if he felt the need to prove them wrong, only if his steps were guided by their doubts instead of his own quiet understanding. So he listened to the discomfort instead of running from it. He allowed the silence to remain. Day by day, the weight of their words changed. At first, it had felt heavy, pressing gently against his thoughts. But as time moved forward, something unexpected happened. The weight began to soften, not because he had forgotten what they said, but because he began to see it differently. Their voices were simply voices. Their certainty was simply belief. And belief, no matter how confident it sounds, does not shape another person's path unless that person accepts it. He began to walk more slowly within his own thoughts, observing, listening. Allowing space between what they said and who he truly was. And in that quiet space, something important began to grow, a deeper patience, a quiet understanding that not every misunderstanding must be corrected. Sometimes the strongest answer is not spoken at all. Sometimes it waits quietly inside the life that has not yet unfolded. The quiet discipline began almost without notice. It was not a sudden decision, nor a moment of great resolve. It arrived slowly, like a shadow stretching across the floor in the late afternoon, gentle and unassuming yet present. He noticed it first in the spaces between words. When they spoke, expecting a sharp reply, he simply remained still, not with anger, not with fear, just still. The room held its breath, though no one asked it to. Their eyes searched for the reaction they believed was owed, a sign of weakness, a spark of complaint, and yet there was nothing, only calm. It was strange how silence could feel heavier than words, how the absence of response could carry meaning louder than any argument. He began to feel the subtle power in that quiet, not a power that demanded attention, but one that existed quietly, firmly, like roots of a tree, deep under the soil. No one could see it, and yet it held him steady. He thought of all the moments when a quick answer might have satisfied someone else's expectation, the moments when he could have spoken to defend himself, to explain, to clarify the truth they had not yet seen. And each time, the urge rose softly, but he watched it without giving it voice. It was curious, he thought, how the mind wants to jump into every small battle, how it wants to prove the world wrong before it even listens. But what if proving something was not the point? He felt it in his chest first, that small release of tension, as if by not reacting, he had allowed himself to breathe more deeply than before. The world continued around him, unchanged by his silence, yet his own heart began to settle. The quiet he kept was not emptiness, it was a presence. A space where he could watch without being pulled, where the voices of others did not have to become his own. And then he noticed the subtle changes in how others approached him. Not all at once, not suddenly, just small shifts, like water finding a new path over stone. They still spoke. They still assumed. They still waited for the familiar reply that had never come. But in that waiting, they began to measure something else, something they had not expected, perhaps even something they had never considered. He began to understand, slowly, that silence could be more honest than words, that it could hold a reflection of truth they could not yet see. Words can be twisted, misheard, or forgotten. Silence, however, carries no pretense. It simply exists, as steady and quiet as the night sky. There were moments when it was difficult, when the urge to speak pressed against him like a gentle wind that could push him off balance if he allowed it. Yet each time he returned to stillness, he felt his body respond, how his chest relaxed, how his mind uncluttered itself, how the small tension of expectation began to loosen. The quiet became a companion, not a punishment, not a shield, but a presence that moved with him inside and around him. And in that space, he began to notice things he had never noticed before. The subtle changes in the way others spoke when they thought he would answer, the moments of hesitation, the small flickers of uncertainty, the realization that their certainty was not absolute. Each observation passed quietly through him, noted but not dwelled upon, like let eddies drifting along a slow river. He began to see that power does not always announce itself, that strength does not always show through action or argument. Sometimes it is measured in what does not happen, in the calm presence that remains when the world expects something else. He felt a quiet pride, not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that roots itself in understanding and restraint. And slowly, over time, he noticed how different his own life began to feel. The absence of reaction created space. Space for thought, for observation, for understanding. Space for the small truths that only appear when one is willing to wait, to watch, to remain quietly present. It was in this stillness that he began to feel a shift, subtle but profound. The energy he once would have spent responding, explaining, or proving himself was now moving elsewhere, into thought, into patience, into the quiet development of something stronger, something deeper than a momentary argument could ever reach. He had discovered that restraint, chosen not out of fear, but out of clarity, could be a form of power all its own. Not a power that demanded the world's attention, but a power that transformed him from within. And in that transformation, he began to realize that the voices outside mattered less than the quiet voice inside. That sometimes the strongest answer is the one that waits, patient, observing, and unshaken by expectation. Time moved quietly, as it always does, indifferent to expectation and untouched by the judgments of others. Days and nights passed in their usual rhythm, and yet for him, everything felt different. The words that had once pressed so heavily on his mind now existed merely as echoes in a distant room. He had carried them long enough to see them for what they truly were. Simple sounds carrying the assumptions of those who spoke them, not the measure of who he was. He noticed the difference in himself most in moments of stillness. When the world slowed and he was left alone with his thoughts, he realized how much had shifted inside. There was a calm he had never known, a quiet center that remained steady, no matter how far the mind wandered or how certain others had seemed. He began to see that life does not require us to defend every perception of us. Sometimes, simply being is enough. What does it mean to be silent in the presence of expectation? To remain quiet when someone believes they know your path. It is not surrender. It is not weakness. It is a different kind of strength, the kind that grows slowly, unseen, inside the spaces between thought and action. He felt it there, a gentle certainty, the feeling that nothing could shake him unless he allowed it. The world did not rush to notice. Their voices continued, soft and certain, but he no longer carried their weight. He no longer searched for the approval or understanding he once might have longed for. Instead, he observed quietly, aware that every statement about him reflected more about the speaker than the person they spoke of. It was in the patience of silence that he discovered something profound, that the loudest arguments are not always the most truthful, that sometimes the most enduring proof of strength is what is left unsaid. In watching and waiting, he realized that the story of his life did not need immediate validation. The world could doubt, assume, even mock, but time has a quiet way of revealing the truth without fuss or noise. He thought about how easy it is to react, to respond quickly with words meant to convince, to prove, to correct. But those responses, however sharp or clever, are fleeting. They do not change the heart of those who have already decided. And so, in choosing not to react, he had found something deeper, a place where observation and patience became companions, and where the quiet of his own mind became a sanctuary. There were moments when he reflected on what might have happened if he had answered them, if he had tried to show them his strength too soon. Would it have mattered? Perhaps for a moment, yes. Perhaps they would have paused, reconsidered, or even been impressed. But he had learned that the approval of others is a fragile thing, and that the quiet proof of one's own life carries a weight no words can match. He began to notice small changes in the world around him, though nothing dramatic. The certainty of others seemed less imposing when met with silence. Their impatience, their assumptions, even their quiet mockery, no longer had the power to disturb him. He felt lighter, freer, as if the energy once spent in proving himself had been returned to him, filling the quiet spaces inside with something new. And slowly, he began to understand what true self-respect felt like. It was not loud. It was not demanding. It did not seek recognition or praise. It was the gentle assurance that his life, his choices, and his inner strength were enough, exactly as they were. It was a calm that did not need explanation, a presence that did not need acknowledgement, a confidence that moved quietly and steadily, like a river flowing beneath the surface of the earth. He realized that silence had become More than a strategy, it had become a way of being. A way of seeing without judgment, a way of listening without interruption, a way of living without the constant pull of expectation. In that silence, he felt a soft joy, the kind that arises when a person finally recognizes their own inner power, untouched by the fleeting opinions of others. And so, in the gentle unfolding of time, the quiet truth revealed itself. What they had once predicted, what they had assumed, mattered less and less. The Fook, world's certainty, could not define him. The quiet strength he had nurtured in stillness now spoke for itself, not in words, but in the steady rhythm of his own life. And as he moved forward, there was no need for triumph, no need for announcement, only the peaceful knowledge that he had found a place within himself where no prediction could reach, a place where he was simply enough.